I think it's time to discuss your philosophy of drug use as it relates to artistic endeavor.
Hello lovelies. Today we're going to take a look at the XCC RPG, which is Xcrawl Classics, which is the latest version of Xcrawl, which has been around for quite a while. It is a hardback book, metallized cover here. We got holographic silver, dark gold, and sparkly red. Those are the metallized parts here. This tome weighs in at about 388 pages. You don't need DCC in order to run it. It's a complete RPG in and of itself, but if you do know DCC, Dungeon Crawl Classics, then you'll have an easier time sliding into using this. Xcrawl is the rather bonkers sort of competitive dungeon raiding game where characters working as teams, parties I guess, take on dungeons and arena fights, but as a spectator sport. One of the main artists involved is my longtime collaborator and enabler of my worst projects, Brad McDevitt. So even though they poached him from his long-term freelance association with me, I'm glad to see him doing well here and getting lots of work. You may find some of the other artists involved familiar as well. I guess the main selling point of Xcrawl is that it completely justifies bonkers, Gonzo, over the top, even stupid dungeons in a way that very few other settings actually do, without having to get up itself about the dungeon as a spiritual underworld or any of that other hoity-toity bollocks. Why? Because these dungeons are entirely artificial and they are created in order to entertain. That is what they're for. It's a weird blend of Blood Bowl, specifically Dungeon Bowl, SLA Industries, weirdly, and Dungeon Crawl Classics. Now, Dungeon Bowl, as you may remember, was Blood Bowl played in caves with a spiked ball, mostly between dwarves. But there's no actual sport here outside of the dungeon itself and raiding through it. So the setting is this weird world, a distorted reflection of our own world, ruled mostly by the North American Empire, which sprawls from Alaska all the way down to the Panama Canal and is ruled over by Emperor Ronald I. So the world is a quasi-modern American one with fantasy overtones. The gods are Olympian, the politics dynastic, and the culture is archly and exaggeratedly capitalist. It's the Running Man in Discworld. It's real world America in a couple of years, I expect. While silly, there are a lot of design cues that make sense and which I've used in my own games or my own game concepts. Things that just make sense in a world of monsters and magic. Walled city-states, for example. Travel being difficult. Smaller groups of more tribal peoples being the ones that can live and survive and thrive beyond the walls outside of civilization. Xcrawl itself as a game idea, as a setting, has existed in 3rd edition, 3.5, and Pathfinder, skipping over 4th edition, which may have fit it a lot better. Now it's in Dungeon Crawl Classics, which may be the best fit of the game's systems under which it has been published. Outside of some particularly action-oriented game, which could also suit, anything relatively fast and adaptable would work for Xcrawl as a setting, which makes the choices of 3rd edition and Pathfinder somewhat puzzling. But DCC is probably the closest to the most optimal system under which Xcrawl might be played. Now, being Xcrawl Classics and using Dungeon Crawl Classics, it of course uses the funky dice of all the weird sizes. But the good news, if you need Zotki dice, however it's pronounced, is that the dice themselves can be bought very cheaply from Chinese sellers like Wish, Temu, and Alibaba. Can be found easily on Amazon, relatively cheap as well, and so it's much less of a barrier to entry than it once was. There are phone apps that include the Zotchi dice as well, should you be so inclined, so you can get hold of them relatively easily. And while they are novelty dice, at least they're just numerical novelty dice, and they're kind of fun to have anyway, especially if you're an unrepentant dice goblin, as so many of us are. It does use the compressed stat bonuses that are more familiar from old school D&D conversions, so it parts company with D20 that way here, though it would have used those bonuses in the other editions. So an 18 is a +3 and not a +5, but this is relatively easy to wangle around and fix if you want to. Personally, I prefer there to be more diversity in bonuses and penalties, but your mileage may vary and you may need to adjust a few of the monsters accordingly if that's the case. So being a Dungeon Crawl Classics based game, it's intended that you use the character funnel. That is, you create a bunch of level 0 characters with an ordinary career before they become a darling of the competitive dungeon raiding scene. And those professions, pre-sport professions, can be determined from a D100 roll, which will provide you with species, occupation, and starting gear. So you're as likely to have started out as a halfling gardener or a delivery driver as anything actually useful. And then of those level 0 characters, most will probably die, and then the idea is that you're left with the character most suited or luckiest to survive and carry on playing. An interesting idea that I have seen elsewhere, but rarely so sort of explicitly pointed out, is the idea that you pick an actor who it plays your character, or maybe a particular character that actor plays that is your character. And you don't have to do that, of course, but it does create a sort of shortcut to half-decent roleplay style and catchphrases. You don't have to do this, of course, but by embracing the cheese of playing recognizable people within this fantasy world, you do get a shortcut for half-decent roleplay. And that is a good tactic more generally beyond this game for new players and so on. If you can envision an actor playing your character, or the characters that they've played otherwise, and you sort of bring them into your character, I think that helps get people out of their shell and gives them cues on how to roleplay, because most people are familiar with people from pop culture, actors, and so on. And so that's a good hack to help people get into the swing of role-playing. Species-wise, you've got humans, dwarves, elves, halflings, gnomes, half-elves, and half-orcs to play with. I think I would have liked to have seen it go even more cosmopolitan. Dwarf is a class of its own, of course, as are other species, but you can mix and match a bit. As I say, I would have liked to have seen some more humanoid monsters included, because there are definitely some ethical questions about slaughtering intelligent humanoids in a dungeon, in a sporting competition, that aren't presented if you're just doing a more traditional dungeon bash. So it might have been fun in this instance to see some monstrous creatures opened up for character play. But yeah. Now, DCC and XCC as a result don't really have a skill system. What they do is allow you to be trained or untrained And that allows you to bring in modification from an appropriate ability. So if you're trained in a skill, you roll 1d20 and add your stat bonus. If you're untrained, you roll a d10 and add your stat bonus, though this lacks higher levels of advancement, say through stats. But that's rules hackable. If you wanted to have more skill levels, you could increase the die type each time, and that's where those funky dice come in. This is somewhat a Magitech world, so you will find repeating crossbows alongside flashlights and spell phones and regular firearms, but most people aren't allowed them. Spell phones have a little bit of satire to them in that they must be recharged and updated once per year at a cost of about 1,000 gold pieces. So yeah, Apple Store, eat your heart out. When it comes to the combat rules, which are important because the main body of the game is most often going to be combat as you sprint through these dungeons, solving problems and killing monsters. The action economy is move and do something. And doing things relates to dice. For each action you get a dice. D20 for your first one, but as you advance in level you may get additional actions, which gives you additional action dice, which can be of varying different sizes. So you spend and or roll a dice to do anything more than one move, which you get for free. And you do get a free attack on anyone with trying to withdraw away from you, so you get those attacks of opportunity sort of thing. Mighty Deeds is their way of handling special attacks and actions, anything you might improvise as your character. And certain classes, fighting classes, get access to Mighty Deeds. To perform a Mighty Deed, you need to roll a 3 or more on an action dice, which can start at D3 and goes up as you advance in level, increasing the likelihood that your weird plan will work out. So to do these, you make a normal attack and roll the special action dice. So you need to succeed on the attack and succeed on the special action dice. So it's a bit of a jip that other characters that aren't fighting classes can't do this, though I get the idea of niche protection and so on. I just don't see why your skinny little wizard couldn't also try to trip someone up in close combat, even if they're just not very good at it. Perhaps other characters could need a 4 or more and only ever get a D4 to roll. Then yeah, there's ways around it. This is doing things like throwing potions into the dragon's mouth, or dust in someone's face, or over-the-top wrestling techniques like giving a goblin the tombstone. You can also develop signature moves for yourself, but these need to be properly described in order to take effect, and you apply a bonus to them, and they're crowd pleasers. You also have a thing called Mojo, which is based on sort of crowd reaction and happiness with you, and Mojo complements luck. You can spend luck or burn luck when you do things that you really want to succeed, or you can spend Mojo on other people to boost their ability to do things, to do particular tasks. So this allows you to be a bit more over the top and a bit more crowd pleasing than you might otherwise be. So yeah, these resources, luck and Mojo, you can permanently burn luck for a +1 bonus to your roll per point lost to any roll, and Mojo you spend for other people. This being sport, you can also get famous. Your fame provides a modifier when appropriate, so if you're trying to get favors or get out of a parking ticket or whatever. And you can also burn it and spend it in exchange for certain things, like having the police look the other way when you have a dead stripper in the boot of your car or whatever. Fame can also net you sponsorships and thus money and numerous other things, and that's where it's similar in some ways to SLA Industries, where you're managing your sponsorships, ensuring your sponsor looks good, trying to get more income that you can spend to make yourself better at dungeon crawling, or just to give yourself a luxurious life, save up enough to retire. Magic is mercurial, meaning that a magic missile in your hands may not be like a magic missile in someone else's hands. Maybe every time you cast it, your hair changes color. Maybe it teleports you uncontrollably. Maybe it smells like someone's cut the cheese every time you cast it. Maybe it's harder to remember than normal spells. Maybe it's cheaper. As with Dungeon Crawl Classics, magic can also corrupt and mutate you, turning you into a hideously deformed creature, albeit one with powerful magic. This is one of the big drawbacks with DCC magic compared to a lot of other old school games. Every spell entry has not just the description of the spell itself in stat terms, but in terms of how it manifests, how corruption from using it manifests, how it misfires. Yeah, there are even whole tables associated with each spell, which means quick and easy reference is pretty difficult, and it's not something you can just note in your book. On your character sheet, and that's enough. No, you need access to this. So personally, what I would do is I would make sure I get the PDF copy as well, or access to a photocopier or scanner or whatever, and I would print out or copy out these things into a physical spell book that you can reference at the table, because otherwise any use of magic tends to make the game drag a little bit, and all the special individuation from how mercurial the magic is, that's fun and interesting, but it does add a layer of complication and farting around, which slows down play, I find. So yeah, that's about it. Half the fun is in reading what's here. It's weird, it's gonzo, it's silly, but all the weirdness, gonzo-ness, and silliness is justified in Xcrawl in a way that it isn't in a lot of other games. If you want something a bit more light-hearted, if you want a ready-made excuse for people to go into dungeons and for there to be bullshit monsters and bullshit traps and all kinds of other weird silliness in it, it's perfect for that. So, it's a good filler game, I think, though the aspect of sponsorships and fame and so on mean you can play beyond the dungeons and make the world interesting, but you're going to have to absorb and take on board the world and how weird and strange and different it all is. So that's the main thing. Alright, yeah, there is a combat wheelchair, but I guess it kind of works in this, given the silliness and over-the-topness. Alright, okay, let's see. Scores. Style. The world is fascinating and interesting. I like Brad's work, and I like the work of the other artists in here. It is mostly black and white with colour end plates. The world that they've created is fun and interesting, but I think younger players might struggle with some of the satire of like Reagan and so on, because it's so far before their time, in the same way that satire of Nixon is slightly awkward for people of my age, because he predates us, really. And a lot of older people seem really hung up on Nixon, and so they may feel that we're weirdly hung up on Reagan or Thatcher over here in the UK. But the world is still compelling and interesting and silly and amusing and satirical in good ways. So combination, I like the artwork. Okay, it's black and white, maybe that knocks it back a bit for some people. But the writing is fun and interesting and good, and sparks a lot of ideas on how to exploit this world to make fun adventures. So 4 out of 5 for style, and kitsch metalized covers and all, and nice faux leather and a ribbon, which we always like. So yeah, 4 for style. In terms of substance, I mean, it is a full game. Not being American, I would have liked a bit more information on the wider world beyond the American Empire. Even just a few lines, you know, some idea of how it's situated in a broader world would have suited me more. And I did feel that there were some omissions, like additional races and things to play, species if you prefer. So yeah, that knocks the substance down a bit, but it's enough. It's perfectly good to be getting on with and playing, and there is quite a big past publication history under those different rule systems. So there are modules and things, and I think modules are probably more useful for Xcrawl than they are for a lot of other things, because there's no reason why the dungeons can't be reused for different teams to negotiate and just change up the traps and the monsters a little bit, so that actually increases the value of other things. So I'm going to say a high 3, not quite a 4 in terms of substance, especially if you situate Xcrawl Classics in the broader sort of Xcrawl universe. So overall, that is a 7 out of 10. That's a 3.5 out of 5. Keep in mind that I use the full scale, 1 to 5, 3 being average. Anything above 3 is good, so 3.5 is good. An average score means that if you're interested in that sort of thing, it's probably worth checking out. Anything higher means it may well be worth checking out even if you're not normally into that sort of thing. So Xcrawl Classics, if you like Xcrawl, definitely. I think this is a much better fit than previous systems. It's just a lot of fun, and there's not enough of that in the world these days. Zang.
"Roar," said the grinder as it chewed its way through Alice, from the crown of her head all the way down to her toes. It ate the lot of her, unfussy, snout to tail, and cleared its plate. It gnashed its way through her dress, her pinafore, her shoes, and her unmentionables. It chewed her hair, devoured her scalp, gobbled up her arms, wolfed down her legs, gorged itself on her torso, noshed on her skin, and gulped her down without so much as a burp to show for it.
Well, I look at it myself as the beginning, really, of an exploration. That's the reason we're exploring. You don't know what you'll run into on an exploration. What the sky looks like, what the stars look like. Do they still twinkle, or are they a steady light when you get outside the atmosphere?